Hello, Lego Dwellers. This is Drew Layton here with the 50 No Limit video. I'm home for the holidays, so this is being recorded on a laptop from 2006 and a $8 microphone. So hopefully the sound quality's not too bad. I did a couple dry runs and it didn't sound crystal clear like it usually is, but it still sounded pretty good and definitely usable. So hopefully that's not a big deal. At worst, if it is a big deal, I'll be back home relatively soon. So uh, it'll, be temporary in that case. Anyway, I recorded about an hour of footage of 50 No Limit, 4 tables. So let's go ahead and jump into the action. On the bottom left, oh yeah, also I should mention, again, since I don't play on this laptop really ever because it's quite ancient, so I don't have HUD reads or notes that I have on my other computer, which I think should be good for a video because then I'll be going a little bit more readless than I am normal. And I try to mention how reads affect my play anyway, so. Uh, I will have kind of vague inklings of how people play, just remembering from playing with them before, but I won't have any HUD stats. So I think I'll end up trying to play a little more balanced and theoretically sound than I might normally if I had a HUD. On the bottom left, this guy min raises, and I've certainly played with him before, and I remember that he's not a reg, but he's not a total fish either. He seemed just kind of like a very weird player. I may even multi-table, I can't recall. Jack 10 off, well, when he men raises, I can call the button pretty wide, and not super wide because he's raising under the gun, but because he min raised, I can call certainly wider than I would be able to normally. So that means that my 3-bet bluffing range needs to widen to weaker hands than I would normally be 3-bet bluffing. So for instance, if he raised a 3x here, I might not call a hand like King Jack off or something like that, in which case I might 3-bet that. But here, since he min raised, I would probably call Queen Jack off. So Jack 10 off seems like a decent 3-bet candidate. And again, I think this might be a little loose in theory, 3-betting under the gun open with Jack 10 off. But like I said, this guy's pretty weird. He's definitely not a reg, so I don't think he's necessarily opening super tight under the gun. And I may have been able to call as well. That might have also been fine. But I think 3-betting is reasonable. And I made it pretty small. I made it 250 because he's pretty short, so I don't have to 3-bet that big to get all the money in if I see fit. Also, I don't really mind if he calls pre-flop since he's not a reg and he's on the fishier side. I think I'll be able to play pretty well in position against him. So really the 250 is, I'm certainly not value raising with Jack 10, but I do really like the idea of getting it heads up with this guy. If I just call the min raise, the blinds will be getting incredibly good odds to overcall. And Jack 10 off, it plays okay in a min raise pot, but I think it plays better in a heads up pot versus someone who I perceive as a weaker player. So if my goal is really to just get it heads up with the under the gun guy, I would prefer to make it smaller rather than larger, seeing as this isn't really a value raise. And I would probably be a little bit imbalanced here with my sizing, I think. I probably wouldn't make it 250 with like a strong value hand. But seeing as I have no history with the guy in the small blind I've never seen before, the guy in the big blind's a gigantic nit, and the guy under the gun I have very little history with, I don't think they're really going to pick up on anything like that, so I think that's okay. The bottom right hand, I raise ace-9 off versus a button limp and a small blind limp, which I think is pretty much mandatory. Ace-9 off is just a value raise versus a couple of fishes limping ranges. So that's what I do. I check back flop. I think bluff catching this hand is much better. Well, not much better. I mean, he'll certainly call with like some jack X and some 10x on the flop. But those hands, like even a bear jack has pretty good equity against my hands. So I'm not thrilled about the range that calls my bet. I highly doubt I'm over 50% versus that range. And I can't continue versus check raise. I really just bloat the pot with a somewhat marginal hand, so check back. Turn's a very easy call. And he bets $10 on the river. I think that my versus a reg, it's possible that my bluff catching range wouldn't be entirely linear. By that I mean, if I think a reg is polarized to, say, King X plus or bluffs, then the raw showdown value of Queen X through 9X, or really Queen X through like, pocket fives or whatever, are all roughly equal. And in that case, I just want to choose the hands that have the best blockers. So if that's the case, if his betting range is pretty polarized, my bluff catching range ends up being kind of cherry picked out of a range of hands that all have roughly equivalent showdown value, but better or worse blockers. This hand is one of those hands that has pretty good blockers with ace of hearts. The heart blocks him having a flush, and it also doesn't block any of his bluffs, which is quite important. I mean, it's possible he bets ace-x twice here, but I think ace-x is also somewhat likely just to check it down. At least ace-x is much more likely to check it down than something like 10 high or jack high, so that's pretty nice. Versus fish in general, though, I tend to make my bluff catching ranges more linear because they really just show up with pretty random hands. And by the way, I should mention, I think most regs are capable of value betting. I mean, most decent regs are capable of value betting some queens twice here. In which case, Queen X is a pretty good hand to call on the river because it has the queen blocker. And jacks and tens are also pretty good hands to call because they block jack 10, as well as some of his kings and queens. So I don't think that ace 9 has ace 9 with the ace of hearts has like a super big advantage as far as blockers goes over those other hands. But anyway, versus a fish, I tend to bluff catch a little bit more linear because they tend to just kind of bet random hands. He might bet, not that he ever limp calls pocket tens pre, but he might just bet pocket tens here twice or something, or just some random hand that I wouldn't, some kind of merge merge bluff type thing. They don't really know what they're doing. So yeah, I mean, I guess I don't think that really applies to this hand per se. I thought I would just mention kind of my philosophy on bluff catching in general. In this particular spot, I'm not thrilled about it, but I think I just have to call. This guy's a fish. His range could still be very wide. He limp called, so I think some of the stronger hands can be taken out of his range. So strong kings, some sets, not twos or threes, I don't think, but kings, nines, and queens can be taken out of his range. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of a whatever spot, but I just tend not to fold versus fish very often because their ranges tend to be so wide in general. And he did bet near pot, but I still only need to be good like 30% of the time, and I have a pretty good blocker with the ace of hearts, so I think I just have to call. I can fold some weaker nines, nines without a heart, perhaps. I might still call those because he's a fish. Hands like pocket eights, pocket sevens with a heart, I would probably just fold the river. Ace jack, although probably bet flop with that hand.